Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to paint this butterfly using watercolor and some mixed media techniques. I'm starting off on this piece of watercolor paper. It's about 4 inches by 8 inches or so. I'm looking at the grids on my mat here, and I'm using a regular pencil, and I'm just starting off by sketching the center of the butterfly's body. Now, I really didn't know what I wanted to create today, so I went through my color cube, which is a product from Sarah Renee Clark, and I'll link that in the video description. But basically, it's this selection of 500 color palettes, and there's a reference photo to go with them. And it's just kind of a fun way to get a creative jump start. And most of the photos that she used are from like Unsplash or Pixabay there. So they are commercial use allowed, which is great for me because I can use those for reference photos for paintings as well. So I'm just really lightly sketching with my pencil here. I just want to get like the contour of the butterfly wings. And that's just basically my starting point. And I wanted to try to make the two sides as symmetrical as possible. And one tip when I'm doing this is I'll sometimes flip my picture around and flip my reference photo around, so then I can look at it again. It kind of helps like unmix my brain a little bit, so I can see like something will stand out to me if it's not symmetrical if I flip it upside down. And now that I'm doing this, I feel a little more confident with my drawing, and I can make my lines a little bit darker here. So that's what you're seeing at this point. And I had no idea what I was going to do about a background. I honestly didn't even necessarily plan to share this tutorial, but I did record it just in case something came out cool. And after I posted the finished artwork on Instagram, I asked if anybody would be interested in a tutorial, and I got a lot of response from that. So that's why I'm voicing it over now. Sometimes it's fun just to like sit down with your supplies and put on a podcast or an audiobook or something in the background to listen to and just create and not really worry about the outcome. And this isn't a project I needed for any sort of work, so it was just kind of fun to do. Now I've got my outline to how I like it, and I'm going to start wetting the butterfly. Now, in a little while, you're going to see that I actually decided to put a background in. So what I'd probably recommend, if you are watching this to paint along with me, I probably would watch the tutorial first. And then when you go back to this stage, I would just wet the entire back of the paper and then wet the entire front of the paper and paint it all in at once. But I wasn't sure what I was going to do with this. So I wasn't even thinking this would be a finished artwork. I was just gonna kind of fool around on this scrap of paper and have fun. So I'm just carefully wetting the wings here because your paint is only gonna go where the paper's wet with watercolor. So it's a great way to control your painting or where your paint goes if you want. And just take your time with it. The brushes, you may recognize those from the Christmas present I got from the Artix company about a month ago. I unboxed that Christmas gift, and it had those travel brushes, and they are metal. They look kind of like plastic, but they're actually metal, and there was a size, I'm not sure what size they said it was, but it's kind of like a size 8 and a size 2, I would guess, at their like kind of typical sizes. They might have been called the 10 and a 2, but this is definitely like a size 6, or it feels like more like a size 6 or size 8. And the watercolors I'm using there are actually some Da Vinci watercolors. I've used Da Vinci for a long time, but not that many colors. I bought a set of Da Vinci watercolors back in like the late 90s. I don't know if they were a brand new company back then, but there was an offer in the Artist magazine, or it might have been Watercolor magazine. It was one of those. And you could get 5 or 6 of the mixing tubes for like, I think it was a set of 6, a split primary palette for like $30 or something. And I mailed away for it, and I really loved the paint. It was a great value. And so I kept buying that trial set to do my classes with. And it was great, and it lasts ages. So I hadn't really bought more Da Vinci painting except for some, I think, burnt sienna deep, because I needed to replenish my burnt sienna. And I've always had really good luck with those paints. And they also make the paints for American Journey, which is the Cheap Joe's brand. Well, anyway, I had a viewer offer to share some of his Da Vinci paints. And this is the Denise Soden, or Denise's Earth Friendly watercolor palette, and you might know Denise Soden. She's a YouTuber. She does a lot of wildlife, animal watercolors, and so he sent over the half pans with those colors in it from her palette, and I just put them in this little Dollar Tree pencil tin, which I thought was so cute. I bought like 3 of them back when I first saw them. And I think you can still get them. They come out with different designs every year, but they're a really neat size. They're just under 2 inches by just under 8 inches or so. And I can just barely, you could probably fit more than 24 half pans, but I was able to fit those 24 half pans in there. And yeah, it's kind of nice. And it has like leaves on it. So I thought it was very fitting with the earth-friendly palette. And I don't think Da Vinci uses oxgall. But I could be wrong. They're not the super flowiest paints, but they flow fine. I mean, there's nothing in it that made me think, oh, these don't flow very well. They must not use oxgall. I think they flow fine. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that, but something makes me think that they don't. But anyway, I was just using a variety of the blues in this kit. And one thing though, their cerulean blue is a hue. It's a mix of phthalo blue and white. I prefer true cerulean blue because it's got some texture. But I think with this palette, Denise was trying to avoid heavy metals, which could be polluting if not disposed of properly. So that totally makes sense. But it would be if I had my druthers, I'd be using a more traditional cerulean. And I'm mixing up a little bit of a purpley color. Now there is dioxazine violet in this kit. And I will link to Da Vinci paints in the video description. And the colors I use, let's see, we've got Indothrone blue, ultramarine, phthalo turquoise, cerulean blue hue, Indothrone blue, and I'm using I think it's a quinacridone rose for my pink there to mix the purple rather than dioxazine purple because that's a little bit stronger. But anyway, the nice thing about the paints is you can buy the palette of half pans for Denise's set. You can buy a set of tubes if you want to just fill your own pans with Denise's set, or you can buy any of these colors in open stock. And I believe they offer 3 sizes. The 37 ml tubes, which is the only size tubes I bought. They're big honkin' tubes, and I would buy them because they were so affordable for what you got, and I would use them for my my classes. They also offer a 14 or 15 ml, and then I think they have an 8 ml now. So yeah, it's good paint, good price, made in the USA. What's, nothing to complain about there. Now on the edges here, I have mixed some Indothrone blue with some burnt umber and made kind of like a desaturated, it's almost like a desaturated greenish gray. And I'm just adding that to the edges to give me that darker edge. I'm not going as dark as the picture is, and you can see that color cube card up in the upper left-hand corner there. They have a matte finish, so they don't have much glare to them, which is really nice, really great for using them as reference photos. On the back side, there's a reproduction of the palette there with tints and shades. So if you're wondering what's on the back. Now, while this paint is wet, I'm using a cut-up piece of credit card to scrape in the veining in the wing, and that works really well because the paint is really wet and it's going to seep into those lines that you scratch in with the credit card, and it's going to give you those really fine detail lines. And the other nice thing about that is if you glaze over and you paint over, any subsequent paint is going to seep into those lines and remain dark, so you're not going to like obliterate them. Even if you were going to scrub out highlights, those darker lines would remain because you've actually scribed the surface of the paper. I think a piece of cut-up credit card is probably my most valuable tool, and it's a completely free tool. And it was funny because when I was cleaning my studio, doing my kind of some people do spring cleaning. I think I like first of the year cleaning, and I also like fall cleaning because if you have kids, the kids go back to school, and then you can clean while the kids go back to school and have a fresh start. And also beginning of the year, it's always nice to clean. But anyway, I found like one of those gallon Ziploc bags just chock-a-block full of cut-up credit cards. It's pretty funny because I always just, whenever I'm done with a gift card or anything like that, an insurance card, I just chop it up and throw it in the bag. So I have like Oh man, I have so many. I used to use them in my classes and stuff too, so I was just got in that habit. And then, security reasons, you don't throw your, cut up your card and throw it away, cut up your card, and I might throw a couple pieces away, then I'd save a couple pieces for my scraping just because I'm, a little paranoid and neurotic, I guess, about identity theft. I don't know. I'm repeating the same process here on the other side. I'm going to try to work a little bit quicker though, because I did have to go in and re-wet some areas to add in those kind of purpley tones in the other wing, and I just wanted to make it a little bit more efficient over here, so that's what I'm doing. The paper that I'm using is actually a scrap of Hahnemulhe Cezanne watercolor paper. This is the 140 pound cold press version, and I don't know if they still make this paper or not. I think they may have discontinued this and gone to making the collection watercolor paper, but I don't know. I don't think I found a Hahnemulhe paper that I don't like, except I'm not crazy about the gray watercolor paper. They have a gray and a tan watercolor paper sketchbook, and I don't like the shade of gray that they use, but that's kind of nitpicky because I really like the tan one. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. You'll have to let me know in the comments below whether you like this kind of more laid back approach of real-time long videos or not. I like to offer them sometimes, but often they just don't do very well on YouTube. So just let me know if you like them. Please tell a friend, because if they get watched, then I'll be more likely to make more of them. To keep really nice, tidy, crisp edges, when you go and paint the body color, don't go right up to the edge. And then when you go in with your darker color, then you can take that right out to the edge and let it wick into the wet paint from the interior. I hope that makes sense. See, when I painted in all those blues, when I painted my water in, I didn't go right up to the line. I left a little bit of a gap so that when I went in with my darker color, I can kind of paint my edge is kind of right on the detail and then just let it kind of flow into the paint I already have there. So I end up with a dark edge that kind of gradiates into the color of the wing. And that just keeps you from having like a big bead of color at the edge or a big puddle. Because if you have a big puddle, you're going to dry, the paper's going to dry unevenly, and then you're going to end up with back runs, that cauliflower blossomy look, which is fine if that's what you want, but if you want to avoid it, you want to make sure you don't have any standing water on your paper. Now what I'm doing here is just kind of dragging in some paint because I want to give it the effect of a little bit of a shading around the lines that I'm going to scrape in with a credit card scraper. Remember, in order for the credit card scraping to work, your paper needs to be wet. So you need to do that while the paint is still wet. If your paint dries before you get a chance to scrape your lines in, you're going to need to go in there with a wet brush and stir that paint up again because the paper needs to be wet. You're technically damaging the paper when you do this, and it's those lines that you scribe into the paper that gives it that really dark fine line detail. So just keep that in mind. You've got to make sure the paper's wet. You can also do that like to sign your name in the corner of your paper or something if the paper's wet. I always used to do that when I was a kid using the back end of my paintbrush. Also remember that scraping onto wet paper is a permanent addition to your painting. So once you've scraped into that wet paint, it's permanent. You could scrub back, but you're always going to have those lines, and anytime you paint over it, your paint is going to seep into those lines and be much darker and stronger. So just bear that in mind when you're doing it, because there's no going back to virgin paper once you do that. Now the next thing we're going to do is paint the body, and I'm using the smaller of the two brushes that I got from Artix for that, and I've mixed up a nice kind of deep kind of eggplanty purple color using colors I've already used so that it matches. And yeah, I'm just going to kind of fill it in. You don't really need to switch to a smaller brush if you don't want to. If you've got a good quality brush, even like an 8 or a 10, it probably has a fine enough point to do this center area. When you want to get a finer point, just use your brush straight up and down. The nice thing about a smaller tip brush like this filming a tutorial is that I can have my brush more angled and my hand out of the way so you can see what I'm doing a little bit. I painted in the detail on the antennas and let that dry. So here I decided I wanted a background, so I'm flipping my paper over and I'm just going to paint water on the back side of my paper. My painting had buckled quite a bit just by having all that water on one small area of the paper. It made it ripple. So I thought, I'm going to paint the back of it. I'm going to slap it down onto my work surface, and then I'm going to wet the front of it, and I'll be able to put a background in there. I'll be able to integrate the butterfly into the background a little bit, and it will give my painting a way more cohesive look. So I wasn't worried about the edges blending out too much because it's going to happen. I'm not going to worry about it, but that is something to expect if you go over a painting, a watercolor painting with water. Now, if I had just taped my paper down to begin with, that would have been fine. I wouldn't have had to wet the background, but I do like the technique of wetting the front and the back of the paper, because when the painting dries, it generally is like flat as a drum. So it's a nice little trick to get that really flat paper. And the other thing that happens when you wet the back side and the front side of the paper is that it acts as an equilibrium. It kind of equalizes the surface tension of the paper or of the water, so that when you go to paint on it, your paint stays put, which it's going to stay put anyway, because this isn't a really flowy paint, but it does control it a little bit more, and you get you get soft edges, but not like crazy flowy edges. I actually like some of that blue kind of floating out into the background, because it's going to help just integrate the butterfly a bit. I don't like my subjects to look cut and pasted on, which can happen if you paint a subject and then try to paint the background around it. Even though I don't want the butterfly to be cut and pasted on, I do want there to be some contrast between the butterfly and the background, so I am using more warmer colors in the background. So I've got the blues, the cool blues and purples on the butterfly. So in the background, I'm doing yellow, which is an opposite of the purple. I'm doing some transparent burnt orange, which is that brownish color that's an opposite of the orange. I've got some reds in there. I've got some greens in there. I'm just kind of going with more muted, earthy tones in the background. I want it to support the butterfly. I want it to enhance it, but also be kind of neutralized so it doesn't overshadow it. I hope this isn't too boring, but it is kind of fun to paint these backgrounds in. I've got little bits of turquoise in there, so I am pulling some colors from the butterfly, but I'm letting it mix into the other colors that are there and get desaturated, kind of knock that brightness down. So we've got harmony. We've got harmony because we're using some of the same colors, but we've got things being muted down. The paint is also very diluted in the background. So here I'm flicking on some of the green, which it was a mix of the green gold and that phthalo turquoise color. And while the paper's still wet, I'm going to do some stamping. And you can see I'm using a flat brush, not a lot of water, and the watercolor paint directly from the pans to ink up this rubber stamp. This is a stamp I made with my stamp maker probably a decade ago, but you could use any sort of bold stamp you had, either a rubber stamp or a foam stamp or a clear stamp. It doesn't really matter. You could even take bubble wrap and paint your watercolor on that. And just make sure that the paint is fairly thick. So if you can see, I'm having very little water on my brush. I'm using a flat Taklon brush because it's not going to hold too much water. And I'm just trying to get paint on there without extra water, because there's so much water on the paper between pre-wetting it and the really juicy mixes that I put down there. There's plenty of water on that paper to help transfer that. You can see I didn't even need to re-ink it to be able to get all those dots. So play with your background, stamp with found objects, see what you have around the house, and make some really interesting patterns. It just adds a little something in your background. After my paper was completely dry, I took some waterproof ink and a large background stamp that is like newsprint collage type design, and I'm going to stamp right on top of the background. Now I will overlap some of the focal point. I like to get in different patterns and textures, and this is going to be for my super dark but super crisp stamping. So you can see I lined it up. I love clear stamps for this type of stamping because it's got more squish. Watercolor paper has a texture to it, so I can press really hard with this clear stamp and get it to squish down into the nooks and crannies and get a really nice crisp effect. This technique is collage stamping, when you're overlapping different images to build kind of a more complex scene. And I find one way to get really nice backgrounds and really nice collage type stamping effects, and you can use stencils for this too, it doesn't have to just be stamps, is to vary the level of dark to light, so your values, and also vary the level of crispness. So what I mean by that is we did our first stamping, the polka dots, on wet paper, and the background was very wet, so it was going to dry lighter. The stamping that we did on there was going to be diffused because it was on wet paper and the paint could flow around a little bit, so you're going to have soft light stamping in the background. Then I used black ink on a crisp, fine text image, so the lines were thin. Even though the ink was black, it wasn't going to be too heavy because the design was really light, and we stamped that on top, so we had crisp and dark. And now we're doing kind of mid-tone to dark on a light, so it's not as heavy as the polka dots. It's kind of a medium weight type of image, this text, and we're doing it with watercolor paint, so it's not going to be as crisp as the really dark stamping we did. It's going to be in between the lighter diffused heavy stamping and the crisp dark light stamping. So having those different layers of ethereal and muted and crisp and dark and kind of wishy-washy and hard and soft, having those different juxtapositions give you a really nice overall effect. Now notice I'm not worried about the butterfly. I'm stamping right over it because I know I can bring that back with my future layers on this piece. Repetition is another really important aspect when you're doing this collage background stamping in your mixed media artwork. So what I mean about repetition, if we look at the background now, it looks a little of a hodgepodge. It doesn't look very cohesive yet. So I'm going to go back in with that polka dot stamp we used at the beginning. Now notice I'm using paint that I've added onto my palette. I've added more water on my brush. So I'm going to be having very kind of loose and juicy type polka dot here. It's not going to be as dark as the text we just stamped. And notice I had repetition of text. I had a printed newsprint text. I had a script text. I'm repeating the polka dots. So I'm doing the polka dots on dry paper. So they're going to be more crisp and smaller because they didn't have a chance to whoosh out like they did on the background. So we're repeating text. We're repeating polka dots. We're basically making a cohesive background. It's interesting. There's texture, there's different colors, but we're repeating a lot of the colors for harmony. So it's that it's not one of those things that you can watch somebody paint and collage, and you can even paint and collage yourself, and sometimes it works, and you might not know why it's working or why it doesn't work. So think harmony, repetition, and variation. And if you can think of those three aspects when you're creating, you're going to end up with much better backgrounds, because your background should be interesting enough that it carries your eye through the painting, but it doesn't compete with your foreground. Okay? I know it's kind of a delicate balance sometimes, but if you kind of keep those three elements in your mind and you think of your background, it's kind of like a supporting character in a movie. You've got your star of the movie, but then you've got those supporting characters that help bring the protagonist through the story and add interest and add texture and add dimension. That's what your background is doing. So here what I'm doing is saying, okay, now I really want a little more color. Everything's looking a little too muted for my liking. Maybe you like it like this. If you do, you will leave it like that. I want a little more color. My favorite color is red, so I'm like, I think I'll get a little red in there. I'd used a little bit of that color on my stamp, on the script stamp, so I know it's totally fair game for me to go in there and add it and, pull it in around the butterfly. I want the butterfly to have a little bit of shadow under it, so by bringing in more color at this stage and kind of dancing it up to the edge of the butterfly, I'm able to define the butterfly a little bit. I'm not going to get that cut and pasted look because I have enough overlapping and blended elements there to make it work. And I'm basically just like, if I see a color I like, maybe there's a patch of yellow in the background. It's like, ooh, I like that patch of yellow. I think I'm going to enhance it. So I'll go and grab a little of that yellow ochre I used originally. I'm going to put it in there and enhance it a little bit. I see a little bit of green. Oh, I like that green. I think I'll use a little bit more of that brighter green. Now, picking up color from my palette, I know those are colors I've used already, so they're fair game and they're not going to be discordant. So if you look at that palette there and you see 24 colors, that can be kind of confusing. You don't want to use all those colors. You want to pick a few and then mix them so you get colors that harmonize with one another. Now that the crisscrossing stroke you see me do there, I'm making like little X's. I'm doing that because I have too many circles and I feel like I need a contrast. I need a contrast of brush stroke and a contrast of shape. So trust your gut when you're doing these collage backgrounds and it won't let you down. Just keep those elements that I taught you in mind. I thought it would be fun to add some sparkly elements into this painting, and I'm using these watercolors that a friend of mine lent me. They're from Dreamland Watercolors, and I thought they would be ideal for this blue butterfly, because you know how butterflies have that iridescent quality to their wings? So I'm using a variety of different duochrome and pearlescent and metallic watercolors here, just to brush on a little bit of sparkle here and there. Now, some of the colors have a little bit more opacity and a little bit more pigmentation, so those are good to use on the edge where I want things to be a little bit more crisp and dark. And then other colors are just like a sheer sparkle, and those are fun for like the body of the wings where I don't really want to cover up the colors underneath, but I'd like to give it a little bit of a sheer sparkle. I also like to flick on metallics if I'm going to do this, because it helps integrate the metallics from the butterfly into the background. And that's what we're really doing on these first layers, is integrating everything, right? We're making the background part of the foreground, making the subject part of the background. We want it all to act as if it's all one being, right? We want it to be harmonious with one another. This color here is like this kind of silvery glitter pearl color. It's sheer, so we can see through it, but it's got this little bit of flash of glitter, so it is going to catch the light and going to be really nice. This would be a wonderful type of project to do in an art journal or in a sketchbook, because as you turn the page, the sparkles are going to catch the light and you're going to be able to see all of that beautiful texture and color and reflection. Whereas if it was framed under glass, it's going to lose quite a bit of that. So just a word to the wise, when you're using your metallics, they are really great in your art journal or on greeting cards or something that's going to be handled and moved and allowed to catch the light. I'm adding a little bit of this pretty burgundy color metallic onto the body of the butterfly, because I feel like it really just needs that extra attention there. And I'm also adding some around the edges to help reinforce that frame we started to paint on there in the last step. After the previous layer was completely dry, I decided to go in and do some fine lining. My favorite pen is the Tombow Fudenosuke pen. It's really nice because it's waterproof and it's also alcohol marker proof. So I feel like I can use this pen regardless of whatever media I want to use with it. And I'm doing a little stippling here when you kind of tap the tip of the pen to give you little dots. And I'm doing that to get that almost fuzzy texture that a butterfly or moth's body has. And I'm also kind of tapping it in stripes there to get that, the plates of the body, to get that little bit of detail there. So I'm using stippling. I'll also be using some fine line texture just to get that not only detail, but also the texture that I want. Now, these pens are my favorite, and you may be wondering why. And the reason I like these is because they have a firm brush tip. So it's kind of like, it's like a hard plastic tip, but it's got some flex to it. So I can press and get maybe like, I could probably get between a 0.02 and 0.05 millimeter tip on that. So it'd be like having a 0.02 to a 0.05 micron, just depending on how much I press on the tip. And I really like that. I like having that feel, that sensitivity of just a little more pressure, and I can get a little bit thicker of a line. And if you like that, you might want to check these out. I will link them down below. There's a 3-pack that I recommend on Amazon. If they're still running this sale, it was $5, and you would get a soft tip, a hard tip. This one's a hard tip one, and a twin tip. And the twin tip actually has gray on one side and black on the other. So that's really nice if you want to do, like, you could do a drop shadow around the butterfly in the gray if you want to do. So I really like that little set. I think I prefer the hard tip more than the soft tip, but they're not really that different from one another. But I bought the set because you can actually get bulk packs of these pens pretty inexpensively. And I wanted to see which one I preferred because I already had a hard tip one. But then, it's completely up to you. And you could ask me on a different day and I might prefer one over the other. But I don't feel like it wears down very easily. And sometimes with microns, I feel like if I use it on watercolor paper that it just wears the tip down much too quickly. This feels like it's a little bit more robust. It's not going to give you that super duper fine tip. It's not going to be like a 0.005 or a 0.1, but I rarely use those really fine ones myself anyway. So this is just a perfect pen for me. And if you like that sort of thing too, you might enjoy it. They're quite affordable and quite long lasting in my opinion anyway. So Tambo Fudnosuke, and I think I'm pronouncing it right this time. I know I've pronounced it many different ways over the last few months when I discovered this. But it is a favorite, and I just like the nice, reliable line I get. I used it a lot during Inktober, so if you go to Instagram and look at my Inktober sketches, you'll see this pen featured quite prominently on those videos as well. So I'm using a heavier line when I do the outlining, and then I'll go a little bit lighter when I do, and the nice thing about this is as I'm doing this kind of flicking out from the center, I can start with more pressure and lift and pull at the same time, so the ends of my lines are much finer than the starts of my lines. So it gives me that more natural shadow. So this hatching that I'm doing from the body, from the middle, is much more natural looking because I can just kind of flick and lift, kind of like you would with a Copic marker. Now I am kind of bringing my lines into the starts of my credit card scraping lines so that my shadow lines kind of turn into veins and kind of go into the scraped lines, but then I stop and I just kind of let the scraped lines do their thing. And then I'm kind of coming in from the outside and doing kind of that same thing, just kind of pulling in the shadows and bringing those hatching lines longer as they meet up with the veins. I hope that makes sense. Hopefully looking at it, it makes sense. I went through just adding that hatching. You can enhance any little ruffles on the edge if you want to. This is a really fun technique if you're doing flowers and you've got that crepey type of petal to them. I am enhancing some of the veining. The metallic watercolor, because it does reflect and scatter light, it can kind of cover up some of your veining a bit. So if you want to bring some of those lines back, see how if you use a really light pressure, you can get really fine lines. And if you press a little bit more or use your pen at more of an angle, you can get thicker lines. I just went through and brought some of the veining back. I thought got covered up a bit by too much of the metallic, but that's really up to your personal preference. And if you didn't like the credit card scraping lines, you can use your metallic watercolors to push them back a little bit more. So that's a great thing about mixed media. You can really make your work look the way you want it to look. It kind of like, it takes away the rules that you would have if you were just doing transparent watercolor and gives you a little bit more agency to do what you want. The next thing we're going to do here is what I call a bridging step. So I'm going to be bridging the black ink from the pen and ink lines that we did to the main color of the butterfly. So this is going to be kind of like shadow. It's going to be not as intense as the black ink, but it's going to kind of blend those dark shadows, those dark pen and ink lines into the body of the butterfly. So I have mixed some Indithrone blue with a little bit of the pinkish red color that we used, and it's made just kind of like a deep eggplant purple. And see, I'm just using my small brush to flick in some strokes of color. So it's going to go, I'm just basically putting in the color where the darkest shadow is and flicking it out into the wings. So I get a gradual transition between really dark to the lighter part of the wings. And I did need to mix up a bunch more color. So again, I'm using some red and some of that dark blue. I think I even added in some turquoise. Honestly, any of the colors you've already used are fair game. I would stick to your kind of blues and reds, maybe a little bit of brown to desaturate them, but you basically want a dark, transparent color though. If you get into opaque colors, if you got into say yellow ochre, things like that. If you got into those more opaque earth tones, you're going to get a muddy look. So you don't want the mud. You're better off sticking with something that's a little bit more purpley. So like your transparent blues, your transparent reds. And once you glaze that over, it's going to look like almost like a black, or like a translucent black or gray. That's going to help you just bridge the gap. I decided I wanted to have a little bit more saturation, so I'm going in with some very transparent turquoise here and popping it in here and there anytime I want to pump up the color. Now, do you notice how the shadow that we put on the edges and towards the center, so on each side of each wing, how it makes the butterfly wing almost look curved a little bit, like it's almost getting to be a little bit three-dimensional? That's the effect we're going for. We want that to really kind of stand out. Those cooler tones are going to pop against the warmer background, and it's just kind of a nice look. Now keep in mind, any of those original bright colors that you used on your butterfly on that first step, before we even knew we wanted a background, any of those bright blues, purples, pinks, those are going to work really nicely to enhance your colors here. Now you might look at the butterfly and put like that rose color between some of the veins. You can section it off almost like a mosaic if you want to. Really use your imagination and let your preference be your guide. You don't need to look at your reference image. In fact, I think I probably stopped looking at my reference image after I did the pen and ink, and just kind of go with the flow and be intuitive with your painting. I think that's one of the best the best things to do when you're just fooling around and having fun, is just to kind of let your preference be your guide. If you look at the reference photo, you can see some kind of white spots and lighter colored spots at the edges of the butterfly, and I thought that a white paint pen would look a little too garish, so I decided to go ahead and repeat something I've already used, which would be the metallic watercolors. So I'm using this kind of silvery white metallic watercolor to put in the white spots at the edge of the butterfly wings. Now they're light at the top, but as they go down, they get more of this pinkish burgundy-ish color. So I am going to switch colors as I get farther down on the butterfly wings. Now, as we're working here at the last stages of this painting, we're going to use small brushes. We're going to use very little additional material because it's almost done. It's like 95% of the way done, but it just lacks a little bit of oomph and detail. And that's what we're going to be doing in this stage. And now we're on to the best part, the finishing touches. And I did decide I was going to go in with a white pen after all. And I did put some opaque highlights next to some of these sparkles, some of the metallic watercolors, just to bring them out a little bit. And I also put a few dots on the body to just kind of give it a little bit of prominence. And I'm just kind of going through and seeing what I really feel like it needs. Again, this is a personal choice, how much of this you want to put in there. I love to go in at the last moments and just add little bits of crisper lines and sparkles and that sort of thing. I'm also going to do some gentle highlighting with some colored pencil. This is a great way to use those pastel colored pencils that have been all the rage. I'm using a combination of Holbein, Prismacolor, and Brut Funer Macaron colors. If you're on a budget, the Brut Funer Macarons are excellent pastel toned colored pencils. You could actually use chalks and pastels and, anything like that. But because these are opaque, they're going to block what's underneath. So use them sparingly. You don't want to cover up that beautiful bits of background that are showing through the wings. You don't want to cover up all the beautiful transparent watercolor or all of the pen work. So I'm going in between the veins with this, and I'm just trying to hit the most rounded part of the butterfly. And notice I'm taking my time here. I'm not rushing through it. I want to make sure that I don't overdo it and that any little mark I make at this stage of the painting is benefiting it. Right? I don't want to just keep farting around on it because I'm enjoying myself. I want to only put down an economy of marks, just the absolute bare minimum I need to kind of bring out the best of the artwork. And any of the colors that you see in the wings, I think are fair game. So right now I'm using that really, really pale, like baby blue color. I can use lavender. I can use pink. If I need to deepen shadows, I can go in with darker colors, which you'll see in a moment. But the key here is just to add small touches so that you enhance it, not cover a bunch of things up. Okay. It's not like putting foundation on your face. It's like putting mascara on, you're adding enhancements. This really pale lavender, I think this is a Prismacolor color. It's really nice here just for these these brighter purple tones. Prismacolor just discontinued 2 of their colors. I believe it's lilac and lavender, maybe. I did a video about it, about which 2 were being discontinued, and 2 substitutes that I found open stock from other companies that you can replace them with if they're 2 of your favorite colors. So you can refer to that video. I'll try to remember to link it down below, but if I forget, then you can just go to my channel and find it. But I find pastel tones to be extremely useful for blending out, for highlighting, for getting a smoothness in my work. So I think it's definitely worth having a set around. The ones that I recommend the most, I have a couple different favorites, and honestly, they're about the same. It just depends on what package you like the best. I like the Collage set of 50 Macaron pencils. They are virtually identical except for one color to the Brutfuner set of 50 Macaron pencils. And then Brutfuner has a set of 72. So if you want more colors, you can go for that one. The Brutfuner sets do not come in beautiful packaging. It's well packaged. It will get to your house safely, but they're not really what you'd want to store them in. So if you want something that comes with nice storage, you can buy the Collage in a nice tin. Or there is a seller on Amazon that sells the Brutfuner Macarons in a zippered case. So either way, you're going to be good. Now this is a Prismacolor, one of the darker bluish violet colors. I'm sorry, I don't remember the names because the names on these pencils are often printed in silver, and the print is so small that I just pick them up by looking at the barrel, and then I look at the lead to make sure that's really the color, and I go from there. And by adding the shadow here at the edge, just darker color, it's helping give that depth and dimension to the wings and helping them look a little bit poofed out, and that's what I'm going for there. But you don't need to add a lot, and if you don't like the look of this, if you don't like that extra layer of color, if you want to keep it more translucent, then don't add the color pencil. It's completely up to you. I like it, but if you don't like it, then don't do it. You know, that's a great thing about mixed media, is you can add as much or as little as you want to accent your piece, and you can use whatever medias you want. Some artists might do a lot of this in gouache. You could do highlights in gouache if you liked a more painterly, chunky look. It's all about your own preference. Now, as a final step, I'm going back in with the black Fudenosuke pen. I have to kind of like work my way up to that word. It's kind of a tough one. And I'm outlining, and I'm just giving myself that little extra crispness that I want. And that's pretty much it, guys. This was so much fun to draw. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I don't usually keep these longer ones in real time on YouTube because the longer videos are harder to get an audience for. So those are the type of videos that you tend to find in my classes and in critique club. So I do have a couple specials running in January of 2023. If you're watching this video when it comes out, I have a 50% off launch special on the 2022 critique club archive. So I will link that with the coupon code in the video description. I also have a 50% off launch special on the critique club bundle if you want to get years 1 through 4 together. And I have a special on my watercolor glass class. So that's a full course on painting glass in watercolor. And I will link all those down below with the coupon codes that are good through the end of the month. So do check those out if you've been looking to grab those classes. And here you can see that I am putting in a little bit more detail on some of the veinings that if I felt the veining was too light, I'm just darkening it. If you don't like this look, don't do it. I think it looks good either way. It just depends on what your preference is, honestly. And, the nice thing about waiting till the end to reinforce this is that if you decide you like it the way it is, you don't have to do it, I usually save my blackest blacks and my whitest whites for the very end for that reason. That way I have that value range that I can grab if I need it. But if I decide it's fine without it, then I don't have to do it. And I hope you got some good tips and techniques from this video on how to build a collage stamped background to add texture, also about repetition and harmony and making your work look a little more cohesive and yet still interesting. That's my goal here. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I want to thank you so much for watching today. If you enjoyed this video, please tell a friend. Please give me a thumbs up. That helps tell YouTube that people actually like long videos. And as always, till next time, happy crafting and happy creating. Bye.